Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving straight into the sources you shared, and it's all about a really cool topic, finding the best spots to race vintage RC cars.
Yeah, it's a great one. Maybe you've got an old chassis you're fixing up, or you grabbed one of those, those awesome re-release kits.
Exactly. So if you're looking to actually get those wheels turning on a track, our mission today is basically to zero in on the places that really get the vintage RC scene, the ones that cater to it.
And what's interesting from the sources is it's not just about finding any track, it's more nuanced.
Right. It's about finding that place with the right vibe, the right support, and, well, just a genuine respect for these older cars and the people running them.
Absolutely. So let's maybe unpack that a bit. According to the material you sent, what's really driving this big comeback in vintage RC?
Well, nostalgia is definitely a huge piece. One source literally says, the cars we loved back in the 80s and 90s have made a comeback, igniting childhood memories. Makes sense.
It totally does. But it feels like maybe there's a bit more to it than just looking back.
Yeah, the sources point to the unique engineering and just the specific way these older models feel to drive. They handle differently,
Yeah.
need a certain touch.
And the social side seems massive, too. It's described as a great night out, hanging with like-minded, friendly people, having loads of banter and laughs. That pops up.
That fun aspect, yeah. They even mentioned specific classes like Run for Fun. It's not all super serious competition.
And those re-released kits seem key for accessibility. You mentioned names like the Tamiya Hornet, Kyosho Optima.
Schumacher Cougar Classic, yeah.
Having those available new just lowers that barrier, doesn't it? You don't have to be some hardcore collector scouring eBay for parts just to get started.
Which kind of brings us to the core question your sources raise. What really makes a great vintage-friendly track? If we're looking for a home for our classic RCs, what should we be looking for?
Okay, so digging into the material, regularity seems to jump out straight away.
Regularity? You mean like consistent race nights?
Exactly. It's not just about a track holding one big vintage event a year, which is great, but it's about having vintage practice or racing on the schedule, regularly.
That makes sense. And dedicated vintage classes too, right? That seems like a strong signal, like that big list you found from Chargers RC.
Yeah, a comprehensive list like that shows real commitment and a good community reputation, a welcoming feel. You want to actually feel comfortable showing up.
And the track surface itself. The sources imply that, well, the super high grip carpet or the really prepped dirt for modern cars, not always the best for vintage chassis.
Right. They were often designed for less grip. So grass or maybe just more natural dirt can sometimes be a much better match for how they drive.
That's a really important distinction. The sources seem to make separating tracks known for big events versus those with regular, dedicated vintage programs.
Yeah, both are good for the hobby overall, but they meet different needs, especially if you want to race week in, week out.
Okay, so based on all that, where do the sources point us? Any global hotspots? Chargers RC in Australia got mentioned quite a bit.
Oh yeah, they seem like a major standout globally. The commitment there sounds incredible. They're even planning a dedicated vintage track specifically for 2025.
Wow. Okay, that's serious investment.
And they're not even waiting till then. Your sources list their regular vintage classes now, things like Run for Fun, the more competitive competition racer, and even a specific class for the re-released Tamiya Hornet, the Hornet EVO.
Stock class racing. Nice.
Often on Friday nights, apparently. And the sources really push the positive community vibe there, plus support from a local shop, OZRC.
Okay, cool. Now, switching gears, what about the UK? Sounds like pretty vibrant scene there, too. Very club-focused.
Definitely. Mill End Racetrack comes up Grass and Astro, known for being fun, welcoming. They have specific vintage and 10th iconic off-road classes.
And they provide club cars for newcomers. That's fantastic. Really lowers the intimidation factor.
Totally. Another UK one, South Lakes Model Car Club, that's Grass, is mentioned as always having some vintage going on, often with those classic brushed motor cars. Simple, fun racing.
And Ribble Valley RC Car Club. That one's indoor carpet, but they alternate Fridays, offering both off-road vintage buggy classes and on-road stuff like Hot Rod Smart Ave Minis.
So quite a mix in the UK. Different surfaces, different class types. Seems like a lot of options depending on what you run.
Right. Now, looking stateside at the U.S. through your sources, the focus seems a bit more on those big events.
Yeah, definitely. Adrenaline RC Raceway gets a shout-out for hosting the annual Vintage Off-Road Nationals VONATS. That's a huge deal.
And Insanity RC Racetrack hosted the RC10 Talk Fall Brawl. So clearly, destinations for major vintage gatherings.
But, and this is maybe a key takeaway from the material, while these U.S. tracks host the big shows, the sources didn't really confirm, regular weekly or bi-weekly vintage classes on their schedules.
Okay, so great for the big annual race, but maybe not guaranteed for a regular Friday night fix. You need to check directly.
Exactly. You'd really need to verify their ongoing programs yourself.
So what does this all boil down to for you, the listener, trying to find that perfect track for your specific vintage car? The sources had some practical tips, right?
Yeah, definitely. First off, contact the tracks and clubs directly. Seems obvious, but things change.
And Facebook often seems the best bet for the most current info on schedules and classes based on the sources. Websites aren't always updated as frequently.
Good point. Also, join those vintage-specific online communities. Forums like RC10 Talk were mentioned, or follow vintage racing series like USVTA or the UK's Iconic Cup. That's where the passionate folks hang out and share the latest info.
Yeah, tap into that community knowledge. And be specific when you're looking. The sources imply like an 80s 2WD buggy needs something different than a vintage pan car or a USVTA car, right?
Totally. Know what surface your car was kind of designed for or what it runs best on. Dirt, grass, asphalt, carpet makes a difference.
And maybe, support the tracks and the local hobby shops that are clearly putting effort into the vintage side of things. Show them it's appreciated.
Absolutely. Finding that perfect spot might take a bit of digging, a few messages maybe, but your sources really paint a picture of a super passionate, welcoming vintage RC community out there.
It really does. It sort of makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe the whole enduring appeal, it isn't just about the cars themselves, cool as they are.
What do you mean?
Well, maybe it's also about tapping into like a simpler time in the hobby, finding that link back to childhood memories and sharing that specific kind of fun and, camaraderie with people who totally get it.
Huh, yeah. Rediscovering something together. That's a nice thought.
Something to mull over anyway as you get that classic chassis dusted off and ready for the track.